eliminating key Hamas leaders, Haniyeh, but also last week Mohammed Def, one of the senior military leaders, to put additional pressure on Hamas. Israel is trying to reestablish deterrence in the region.
Hamas is not people, it's an idea. And that idea will never die.
You can't completely eliminate Hamas. You can certainly destroy the ability of organizations.
Reports are suggesting a direct strike on Israeli military bases.
A multi pronged attack utilizing its proxy forces in the region as well. The Iranians realize that at the end of the day, they are not going to be able to prevail in a military conflict with Israel.
On Times of India News Point today, we are joined by Heino Klinck. He's former US Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for East Asia and is now, of course, a known global strategist. Mr. Klinck, I'd like to start off with the death of Ismail Haniyeh, the Hamas boss, the political boss, and what do you expect will happen next? The Middle East was already in a very dangerous situation. Have we shoved it to on the brink even more with this?
Well, there's a number of ways of looking at it. Obviously, this is in some respects an escalation on the part of the Israelis by not only eliminating the top Hamas political figure, but doing it in Tehran. And I think that aspect of it is particularly salient. And putting, and saying in military parlance, going downtown and literally going downtown in Tehran and doing it is certainly from an Iranian perspective, from a Middle East perspective, an escalation. On the other hand, there's another way of looking at it, and that is that Israel is trying to reestablish deterrence in the region. Um, Hamas obviously launched this horrific attack on the 7th of October, which, by the way, not only was it organized and carried out by Hamas, the political leader of which was Haniyeh. Haniyeh publicly cheered it. Haniyeh publicly talked about we need to have many more October 7th. So Israel obviously cannot live in a state of constant threat by terrorist organizations that surround it. So this could be viewed as an attempt to reestablish deterrence vis-a-vis those individual terrorist organizations, but also against Iran itself, because the common denominator, whether it's Hamas, Hezbollah, or the Houthis, is Iranian support. Without Iranian support, whether it be financial, military, and otherwise, these organizations would fail to exist in the current state.
You know, the second way that you said that you could look at this situation, which is that Israel had no choice, they had to do this because Haniyeh had already talked about more October 7th. So I was speaking to somebody and they said that Hamas is not people, it's an idea, and that idea will never die. You kill one, you kill two, five more will pop up somewhere else. Hania was also the more public figure, right? He was also the person who was the chief negotiator in all these ceasefire talks, even though that was also not going anywhere much.
Those are all valid points. And yes, as a concept, as an idea, as perhaps even a political theology, you can't completely eliminate Hamas, just like you could not completely eliminate ISIS, or arguably you could not completely eliminate Nazism. However, from a perspective of a military threat, you can certainly destroy the ability of organizations to be able to organize, plan, train for, and execute major operations. And for instance, the US led coalition against ISIS has been largely successful in doing that in the Middle East. yes, ISIS has reconstituted in parts of of Syria in particular, and other places in Africa, and even to a certain extent in Southeast Asia. But for the most part, it's been eliminated as a serious military threat. Of course, you saw that it took a total war against Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan to defeat those military threats. Arguably, Nazism as a whole did not die completely in 1945, but it was certainly to the point where it could present a military threat to its neighbors. Hamas is certainly a smaller scale than that, but I think from an Israeli perspective, when we think about again the October 7th attacks and the number of Israelis that were killed as a percentage of their population, represents a major, major catastrophe for Israel. And I don't see how any Israeli leader could leave the military threat that Hamas presented on October 7th uh, unchecked, not degraded, not destroyed. And despite Netanyahu's overall lack of popularity within Israel and the Israeli people, most Israelis still agree that Hamas as a military threat has to be eliminated.
Khamenei, the Iranian supreme leader, has hinted at a direct response from Iran, given that the killing happened on Iranian soil. How big a response do you expect it to be?
Well, it'll be interesting because I do anticipate that Iran will respond. They've already telegraphed through the United Nations that they plan to invoke their right of self defense under Article 51 of the UN Charter. And then, of course, in April, we saw a massive, unprecedented missile and drone attack launched from Iranian territory towards Israel. The vast majority of those systems were, of course, intercepted by countries, not just Israel, but the United States, the United Kingdom, and others, including Arab countries.
Yeah.
Um, so I think we can anticipate a strike. Um, the form it will take will be interesting. I think the Iranians realize that at the end of the day, they are not going to be able to prevail in a military conflict with Israel. The fact that the Israelis have struck into Iran, assassinating Haniyeh, and again, although the Israelis certainly have never acknowledged this, have been able to carry out other strikes, other assassinations against Iranians in Iran, certainly makes, I think, the political and military elite within Iran feel vulnerable. That being said, Iran has to respond. They have a new president. He can't appear to be weak either. It will be interesting to see if it will be a symbolic attack or if they will actually um, try to cause Israeli casualties. Because if any Israelis are killed, the Israelis will respond again. And again, as you said, you will have this spiral of violence continue.
It's interesting that you invoked the last time on the April 12th or 13th, was it, strike back by Iran, was almost a warning. Most of their missiles, projectiles were hitting barren lands, maybe a couple of non-resident, a couple of military sites, but mostly non-residential, no death of human life, so to speak of. This time, however, reports are suggesting a direct strike on Israeli military bases from Iran. Do you see that taking shape?
I could envision that. Yes, I could also envision a multi-pronged attack, not just emanating from Iran itself, but a coordinated attack between Iranian forces in Iran itself, again, missiles and drones, as well as potentially the utilizing Iran's proxies, for instance, Hezbollah, that has a massive inventory of short range and medium range missiles in Lebanon, as well as the Houthis. You have to remember as well, last week, I think it was, where the Houthis launched a drone that entered Tel Aviv and
Yes.
killed a civilian there. And I believe that that really demonstrated the vulnerability that Israel has. So I could foresee a multi pronged attack, not just from Iran itself, but utilizing its proxy forces in the region as well.
John Kirby has already warned Israel against Iran's military capabilities. Can Israel be overwhelmed if Iran does notch up the strike back this time?
Can Israel do what? I'm sorry?
Can Israel be overwhelmed?
Overwhelmed. There is certainly the possibility of overwhelming Israel's air and missile defense forces. I think, particularly if it is a combination of longer range missiles coming from Iran itself, combined with shorter and medium range missiles and drones launched from Yemen. And Lebanon, and perhaps even Gaza itself. We have to remember Hamas does maintain the capability to launch rocket attacks against Israel. That potential exists, but I think that potential exists only in the short term. That's something that Israel's enemies might be able to accomplish once or twice, but not in a sustained manner. Because what will happen inevitably is that Israel will go after the launch sites and the launchers, the archers, as we say, because at a certain point, it's not just going to be a game of defense for the Israelis. They will go on the offensive.
Tell me, Hanye, as you pointed out, with these high-profile killings, and I'm not just talking about Ismail Haniyeh's death, I'm also talking about the Hezbollah commander, Ford Shukri, I think his name is,
Mhm.
his killing. Over in the last 24 hours, there have been two, three high-profile hits by Israel. Uh, do you believe that Netanyahu has shored up a big win? Does this give him plausible rationale for a ceasefire in Gaza?
Perhaps that's a component of it. But again, at the end of the day, the ceasefire has to be agreed to by both parties. But we have to remember that over the last several months, it wasn't just the Netanyahu government that had been dragging its feet in coming to terms with a temporary ceasefire. It was also Hamas that would not agree or would move the goalposts. Secretary Blinken uh, stated a couple months ago it was Hamas that was holding things up. And you could tell he was visibly frustrated because it appears as if we had been on the cusp of a temporary ceasefire on a number of occasions. Blinken has traveled into the region, I think, at least 8 times since October. The United States has obviously been very vested in trying to come to a temporary ceasefire. But both of the warring parties, at the end of the day, are the ones that have to determine that the time is right. Um, Again, Israel wants its hostages back. It's worth noting that the hostages are not just Israeli citizens, they're American citizens and citizens of other nationalities amongst those people that Hamas is holding. Um, and Netanyahu has not moved away from his objective of, quote unquote, destroying Hamas. I think what remains to be seen is how is that defined? Eliminating key Hamas leaders, Haniyeh, as most recently, but also last week, Mohammed Def, one of the senior military leaders, I think is meant to put additional pressure on Hamas. And again, demonstrating that sooner or later, the Israelis will get you. Um, and it'll be interesting again to see if that motivates the remaining leadership of Hamas to feel enough pressure to make the concessions or compromises necessary to come to an agreement for a temporary ceasefire with Israel.
Hania was the chief negotiator from Hamas's side, and in any case, the talks were not going anywhere. Now, with him dead, what do you think will happen?
Well, I think we find ourselves in a very precarious position because, on the one hand, as the Qatari prime minister has said, negotiations, and I'm paraphrasing here, when you kill the chief negotiator, your counterpart, that will certainly hamper negotiations. So we will see. Um, the leader of Hamas in Gaza, Yahya Sinwar, who was viewed as the mastermind behind October 7th, and who has certainly been a fervent believer in the cause of struggle against Israel. I'm not confident he wants peace. To be honest with you, he's talked about that the sacrifices the Palestinian people have made in Gaza are necessary sacrifices, because he realizes that there are many, many non-combatants, innocent civilians that are getting killed. Not only does he realize that, I believe that's part of his strategy. To be able to isolate Israel in the international community. And he certainly has been somewhat successful in that when you consider the protests and the political recommendations that Israel has seen all over the world. Um, I think there's going to be a pause in some of these negotiations. But ultimately, if you look at peace negotiations throughout history, um, one of two things leads to some sort of settlement. One of the warring parties is completely defeated. So, for instance, again, the World War II example,
Yeah.
or both parties are so tired of war because both parties have been fighting either for so long or for so hard, or a combination of the two, that they will find compromise. I think the silver lining here may very well be that Hamas has taken such a toll, both in terms of leadership and the continued toll that's happening in Gaza, that they will be more likely to agree to coming to a compromise or some sort of consensus with their Israeli counterparts. Conversely, the Netanyahu government, which is under a lot of stress domestically, because you have to remember they have had to evacuate tens of thousands of people from northern Israel because of the
Yeah.
Hezbollah threat. He's under a lot of political pressure at home as well. So perhaps we're getting to a point where there is light at the end of the tunnel.
That's the silver lining I think we can look forward to, that
So,
they're either, yeah, really, let's hope for that, because there's just been too much death and the destruction over the last almost, I think, 9 months,
yes.
and it's just bordering on inhuman, the kind of plight that we see, at the visuals and the pictures that we see coming out of Gaza in itself, of the civilians and the children and the women there. But having
We have
said
to
that,
remember, though, what precipitated all that. If you look at
absolutely, no
the
denying
videos
it.
of what happened October 7th, that was a barbaric
Absolutely,
attack.
absolutely. As a country ourselves, which faces a lot of terrorist threats, one does recognize that,
That's right.
and terrorism has been rampant in our northern borders, as you are well aware. So I don't have to say that. But having said that, let me just come to the. As a former Defense Department official, do you believe there is an end in sight? You I mean, you said there's a silver lining, that things could, now start moving on the negotiating table after Hamas has taken such a hit in terms of leadership as well as the situation in Gaza. As a former Defense Department official, how do you, I'm sure, dealt with many such situations in your career. From your past experience, what lessons can be drawn?
Well, first and foremost, there is no military solution to this problem set. There has to be a political solution. Um, Military activities can serve as a foundation that leads to a political solution, but there is no military solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Um, so I think in the short run, it is to be expected and I think reasonably so, that Israel must eliminate uh, or at least mitigate the military threat that it faces. First and foremost, Hamas, secondarily Hezbollah, and if you recall, in recent years, there has been a relative calm on the Israel Lebanon border. So they have come up with a modus vivendi, if you will. The Houthis, I think, are secondary. So there are examples of having some sort of political accommodation for Israel with some of these terrorist organizations. I think we've also seen in the not too distant past, whether it was the Abraham Accords that were reached during the Trump years, or even the Camp David Accords with between Israel and Egypt, those peace agreements. There are examples of Israel having a normal state of affairs with Arab countries. I believe we were on the cusp of a historic agreement between Israel and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia in October prior to Hamas's attack. I would say that the timing of the attack may very well have been inspired by an Iranian desire to thwart that peace
Yeah.
accord. So I do believe there's lots of precedents for peace in the region and that it is possible. But again, Israel needs to have certain security assurances, whether they be formal state to state agreements or, again, eliminating the military threat of terrorist organizations who will not accept Israel's right of existence. And again, fundamentally, if you think about this, so on the one hand, Israel has been criticized for assassinating Haniyeh, who was, the top Hamas negotiator for the ceasefire accord. On the other hand, they were negotiating with someone representing an organization that continues to say that Israel does not have a right to exist, that wants Israel to stop being. So there is a certain irony there if you think about it. If you're trying to negotiate with somebody who, in essence, that organization, Hamas, and its representatives want Israel to no longer exist on the face of the earth, which obviously is not going to happen. Israel, throughout its history now, has learned, and has not just learned, but has dedicated itself to protecting the state of Israel and its citizens, and that is not going to change.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Klink. Thank you for those perspectives. Thank you, viewers, for watching this broadcast. Stay tuned to Times of India for the latest updates.
Thank you very much.